Well, so anyway, I got to say, no American TV network did themselves any favors on Saturday or Sunday with either the coverage of what was going on in Russia, the anticipation of what was a called shot by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the co-founder of the Wagner Private Military Corporation, Wagner PMC. Of course, his patron saint is Vladimir Putin, who remains in his office in the Kremlin, or wherever he is right now, but he's in charge of Russia. Our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, because you saw those headlines yesterday. Prigozhin blinks. He doesn't blink. He winks. But more on that in a second here.
President Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator. How much did that hurt the work you did?
Margaret, one of the things that I think you heard me say during the trip and after the trip is the
and it was funny because he seemed really unarmed. He had a sort of a boilerplate. He was prepped to go on talking about something that happened last weekend, where Biden called Xi a dictator at a fundraiser, and has a greater rift between the U.S. and China.
The main purpose,
no, it hasn't,
was to bring some greater stability to the relationship. But one of the things that I said to Chinese counterparts during this trip was that we are going to continue to do things and say things.
And what he went on to talk about is sort of not that NATO has anything to say about who is in Putin's favor and who's not. But my favorite Norwegian dude, Jens Stoltenberg, had his first impressions of what the news was coming out of Moscow.
We see the weakness of the Russian regime, and it also demonstrates how difficult and dangerous it is for President Putin to be reliant on mercenaries. That has actually turned against him. And
but did they, Jens?
It also demonstrates that it is hard to predict exactly what will now happen in the next days.
You know what's really interesting, speaking of the NATO, is that as of yesterday and as of right now, there's more nose-counting airplanes in NATO airspace than I've seen since the second month of this entire war, whatever it was, 13, 14 months ago. Because what it appeared in I often reference Telegram, the social media, posting, sort of thing. And one of the things that I follow, one of the places that I get, one, if you follow the Ukrainian government, everything is fine and, the whole thing. Thanks, NATO, we could use some F-16s, that whole deal. If you go to the other end of the spectrum to the full Putin propaganda, you're seeing, equal exaggeration, the whole thing. Believe it or not, in the middle are a couple of different Telegram feeds from Wagner PMC veterans, guys that are no longer working for them, but are definitely on their side. And they're cynical the way that you get when you're in the army or and overwhelmingly, most of the core of the Wagner PMC guys are prior Russian army dudes who wanted to go make that money in Syria or Mali or wherever they are right now in Central Africa, because Putin was backing them with a lot of money. And so you got paid way better than the Russian army. You got to be surrounded by people that were good at what they did, or at least they told each other they were good at what they did. You got to wear better kit and better weapons, the whole thing. And then, oh, by the way, Wagner has been sitting in a country taking their diamonds for 10 years. So the company got to be self-sustaining. That was Putin's vision from the beginning, was to take some Russian government money, but also do Russian foreign policy for him. It's kind of like the entire bone of the French Foreign Legion is that by law, no enlisted man in the French Foreign Legion can be a French citizen. You can gain French citizenship, but when you deploy them to Bosnia and snipers start shooting them in the head, you're not losing Frenchmen, because by law, you join with a new name and you make up your backstory. And then if you make it through your first enlistment, you can keep your backstory and your new name, only now you have it in a French passport. So that's the entire point, is that you're doing foreign policy without losing Frenchmen. So this way, if you die in Syria for Wagner, you get buried in Syria. They don't fly you back. You're dead. You're literally dead weight. They don't fly you back. You're lucky if they tell your loved ones. If you die in Africa, they bury you there. That's the entire point of it. Their loyalty starts and finishes to Vladimir Putin because Yevgeny Prigozhin, his loyalty at the beginning of the day or the end of the day is to Putin. So why did he rebel? Did he rebel? Did he? He's been fighting with the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff of the Army for a couple months openly on Telegram. About 4 weeks ago, Wagner's clearly been redeploying. The entire private military company is off the front lines, and they've gone back into Russia proper because they're redeploying. And it's a redeployment that Putin wants very badly to cover up. Now, you can't hide from the E-8s and the J-STARs and all that. What's really remarkable about right now over NATO airspace is over Latvia, the Turks are really loath to leave their own airspace for this NATO mission. They certainly don't take their airborne electronic warfare systems out. Well, they have one over Latvia right now. They have a Boeing 737, the Turkish version of the J-STARS ground surveillance system. It's orbiting over Latvia right now, looking in Belarus. British electronic warfare aircraft and then American electronic warfare aircraft are all looking in Belarus because that's where Wagner is redeploying to. And that's what this was over the weekend. It wasn't a coup. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a couple things. It was an attitude reconnaissance, and it was a redeployment en masse to Belarus. A couple things, by the way. Viktor Lukashenko, the cosplay Stalin, the leader of Belarus, he's a seat cushion. He retains the impression of the last person that sat on him, and the last person that sat on him was Putin. He's a side player. He's a known idiot, and he is the titular leader of a Russian sock puppet in the form of the country called Belarus. It's such a Stalin cosplay. They haven't even updated the name of their internal security department. They still call it the KGB. I mean, that's how 1958 they are. So the Wagner Group takes the city of Rostov, which is a major city in the south of Russia. It's also the southern military front, as it's called, the headquarters for everything that's going on in Ukraine comes out of Rostov. So Prigozhin takes Rostov and he takes the army headquarters and he sits down and has a chinwag with the commander of the entire Ukrainian front. And they don't look agitated. And then meanwhile, out on the streets of Rostov, no one's clearing the streets or agitated. They're treating these guys like rock stars. And why would that be? Well, because Prigozhin is a rock star in Russia. He's portraying himself, and he has portrayed himself as the only guy who's fighting effectively in Ukraine. And his initial remarks are being badly misreported here in the U.S. His statements were to Sergei Shoigu, the head of the actual Minister of Defense, this sort of big moon-faced, pot-bellied guy. And then the guy with the blank stare next to him is Gerasimov, the chief of staff of the army, the Mark Milley of the Russian military. Prigozhin never said, Putin, I'm coming for you. He never said that. He said, I want to meet. When he got to Rostov, he said, I want to meet with Shoigu. He needs to fly down here and meet with me because he is a loser. And he's been saying this for months. Last time you saw him that angry was 2 months ago. And I think I played a quick little bit of it. But he did a exchange of the dead with the Ukrainians. He had some Ukrainian bodies. And it's weird how they exchanged living prisoners and they exchanged each other's dead. And the Ukrainians didn't. The Wagner guys didn't have any Ukrainian dead, but the Ukrainians said, "Hey, we dropped some of your cargo off at a field at this exact space," and they laid these guys out like they're in formation, and they fell backwards. But they didn't disrespect the bodies or anything like that. And when Prigozhin saw it, he got on his cell phone and he recorded a rant about, look at this, look what you've done, look behind me. And he's talking to Shoigu and Gerasimov, the two guys in uniform, who, by the way, and this might be too much backstory for all of you, but really I'm only taking a few minutes. You need to know that Prigozhin never wore the uniform. He wore a prison uniform for 9 years. He knows that system really well. Putin never wore an army uniform. He wore a KGB uniform at the last gasp of the KGB. If you don't know this, the army as an institution and the KGB as an institution hated each other and hate each other to this day. Okay. That was the worst thing you could do in the KGB, is be assigned to spy on the military. But people they hated it. They absolutely hated it because you were effectively in the army. You couldn't tell anyone that you weren't really a Sergeant Tentpeg. You were actually Pavel Tentpegsky, KGB captain. And this is how you make majors. You spend 2 years as an enlisted guy in the Russian army, and you write reports. But they can't know. And it was horrible duty. And the army hates the KGB because they were the guys that shot deserters, not the army, but the KGB in World War II. They as an institution, they hate each other. And the army doesn't like Shoigu because he never wore an army uniform either. He's Putin's guy. So is this Game of Thrones enough yet? And so what this really was Putin wanted to see how the army would react to Wagner coming within 200 miles of Moscow. Well, they didn't react. They did nothing, which tells Putin everything he needs to know. He can get rid of the top guys in uniform and look like, because what Prigozhin said was Shoigu and Gerasimov lied to Putin to get us in this war. There's no Nazis. These people are fighting honorably because it's their country and all. He put it all on the guys in uniform that Putin wants to replace. But Putin doesn't want to be replaced by the army. And that's always a threat in Russia. You need to know where they are. In this. Well, he found out where they were by Saturday night. He found out that he can do whatever he wants with the Wagner Group, and the army won't do anything. So anyway, why is he redeploying him to Belarus? Well, that Kiev isn't going to take itself now, is it? So second time might be a charm. We'll be back. I'll expand on that in just a second, and then we'll get into the business of Squishmallows, the red hot iron in the fire of Monday, the 26th of June, 2023. Back in a second, AM 770. Thing two.
Second thing.
There was a brief rebellion on Saturday in Russia? ? The leader of the powerful mercenary group, Wagner, sent his troops marching towards Moscow, seizing a major military base and key installations along the way. It's being portrayed as a coup attempt or a rebellion or anti-Putin movement, but to hear Yevgeny Prigozhin say it himself, it was he wanted to meet with the Minister of Defense because he's so incompetent. He said that you guys lied to Putin. So he's being the ultimate poodle leg humper for Putin. And for his punishment, he and the Wagner Group have been banished to Belarus, just north of Kiev. By the way, you'll want to look at a map on this one. You can't just take my word for it. But there's an area where the Belarus, Russian, and Ukrainian borders are converge in a Mercedes logo, and that's where the Wagner Group have been banished. And one thing about the last year and a half is that Putin is still obsessed with seeing himself at a victory parade in Kiev. And all he's done, the entire effect of this, the really curious event that Putin said, there'll be punishment and the whole thing, he winds up being the guy closest to Kiev. And so there might be a July surprise right around the corner, and it ain't going to be a coup. And by the way, the Wagner guys, they brought their shoulder-fired, their man-portable air defense system. They brought their anti-aircraft missiles with them, and they did shoot down a few helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. There's no love lost between the Russian Air Force and Wagner chaps anyway. But is anyone going to pay for those? I mean, is there going to be a reckoning? Well, if going to Belarus is it, then they can lock them up, throw away the key. So thing three.
Third thing.
It's going to be a busy week of the old Supreme Court. It's funny, I saw a Tacoma-adjacent casino, but she's out now.
Well, a Pierce County woman who's been in jail, judge just ruled.
A warrant had to be served and at this point, public health warrant like that, and you have TB, maybe I'm going to suggest, on her picture, sitting there effective than an ankle bracelet. How about a laminate with her poster? A little more inaccuracy in American media, a little more accuracy coming from me. Right off this AM 770 KTTH.
A fabuloso!
Strong, so joyful.
AM 770 KTTH. Well, you're really late to the party if you're hitting your Ocean Gate Titan conspiracy theories now. Last week, while it was happening, was there was the why all those billionaires in one place. What were some of the other ones? Why to go missing ones. Anyway, you can all take a seat because turns out it was just a big head fake, so that so that no one learns the truth about the Titanic.
What if all of this is actually a ploy to keep people from visiting the Titanic wreckage? But if that's the goal, why? Maybe because if people explore the Titanic too much, they would discover that it wasn't an iceberg that sank the Titanic.
No.
There's a lot of alternative theories about how that sinking occurred.
Okay, but I don't care about a lot of alternative theories. You have several hundred people actually lived through the event and managed to tell the story. There were several of them eyewitnesses, in fact. And then when the Woods Hole guys discovered the wreckage, they also took pictures of the giant rip. Do you have an alternative theory of why those particular billionaires, Greg? How do you explain that?
I thought it was to distract us from the Hunter Biden story.
Yeah, that's another one. Someone said this all this media alignment, everyone agreeing in the media that there was it turns out, flawed submarine that sank. I'm pretty sure we all are in alignment on that. And I will say this: I got to point out that I think it's pretty clear that the Coast Guard did inform the family. Look, we heard from the Navy that there was absolutely positively the sound of crushing at the exact time that we lost communication. And so if that's the case, then they probably died instantly. And I think they were instructed, please don't let or they were told the morning of, whatever, Thursday, because that company up there, that Ocean Gate and Everett, they took their website down. Their phone doesn't answer. The signs came down. I don't know about the employees, if they were told that, you can clean up for a month and look for a job, or I don't know. But that sure happened like it was like they knew it was coming.
I will say this. I'm no physics expert, but the one working conspiracy theory I have, which I'm sure is not true, but I've indulged it somewhat, is that it's I hate to say it, but it's a cleaner narrative to say that the thing imploded and the 5 people aboard felt no pain whatsoever, rather than to think about them suffering over 5-6 days before oxygen runs out at the bottom of the ocean. You see what I'm saying?
Eating each other.
And so I could see someone coming out with a conspiracy saying, well, to sort of soften the blow for families a little bit, it's nice to say, hey, the thing imploded in an instant, they felt no pain, and we found some debris, rather than it was this long, painful death where they asphyxiated. Is that the term?
Yeah.
Look, I'm not a physics expert.
It's science.
So I'll say that it imploded.
I'm a conspiracy
I'll buy that.
Theory expert.
Yeah.
That it was intentionally sunk as part of an elaborate insurance scam, and even that it was sunk by a newly created Federal Reserve.
Now you're piling conspiracy theories on when you're saying that this was to deter people in the future from exploring the Titanic, because you're going to find out it was not sunk by an iceberg, but it was done so by the newly created Federal Reserve.
And the Illuminati.
And
there you go.
You know what's crazy is there's people out there saying, please send me that link. Well, I'm not going to, but it's something that I think. What do you call it, the opposite of a conspiracy theory? How is this not an obvious theory? Anthony Blinken was asked about by a befuddled Jonathan Karl on CNN. How is it that Putin just lets this Prigozhin go without any punishment?
So I think this is clearly we see cracks emerging. Where they go, if anywhere, when they get there, very hard to say. I don't want to speculate on it.
Is that, you mean when the cracks get you're very crack obsessed.
But I don't think we've seen the final act.
So it sounds like you're saying this is not over. I mean, it seems hard to believe that Putin, who is known for executing his critics, would allow Prigozhin to move away as a free man.
But Prigozhin didn't criticize Putin.
Amnesty. I mean, what do you, is the rebellion really over?
So much that is beneath the surface has now surfaced again in terms of questioning the very premises for the war, in terms of questioning the conduct of the war.
He's dancing around something that he knows, and I think I know what he knows without saying cracks.
In terms of questioning what good this has actually done for Russia, and of course it's been exactly the opposite. This has been a devastating strategic failure for Putin.
Or has it? Is the opera over on this one? And he, that is what I detect, that he's trying to avoid saying something that he is aware of. But I think open sources tell us by looking at the tracking of NATO aircraft right now on the Polish-Belarus border, what is up. Because if you were paying attention, and I got to say, out of worldwide media, BBC went wall to wall with Russians and Russian experts and the whole thing. And it was excellent analysis all day long. And what's really funny is people from Russia and people from Ukraine never bought it on the surface anyway. It was never a coup or rebellion. It was always aimed at the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff, Shoigu and Gerasimov. And the fact that his punishment is that he has to go to the southern part of Belarus, where the initial invasion began, is one of the most significant things. And it's also, the other open source in that is Wagner PMC channels on Telegram. Because one of the things they almost within half an hour of the agreement that the Wagner, this fictional convoy that no one ever actually saw, a 20-mile convoy, couldn't detect it on satellites or anything. But it was supposedly headed to Moscow. It took a left. It headed west. Before there was any deal announced, it started heading back into Belarus, where the initial invasion was staged from in February of last year. And so on these Telegram channels, they started sending out a little GIF of Yevgeny Prigozhin winking, not blinking, but winking. And I retweeted that at Dark Secret Place yesterday. And I think, and these are not guys currently employed by Wagner, but they're guys who did spend years and years and years in Wagner, and they do Wagner-based pro Wagner Telegram updates and memes and stories and videos and if Wagner blew it up, the video is going to be on a couple different channels. One of them is called "Reverse Side of the Medal," which is a Wagner phrase. We don't have time for it, and it won't add to the story.
I've been consuming copious amounts of talking heads commentary about this alleged coup that happened or is happening.
Are you seeing cracks?
Russia.
This is clearly, we see cracks.
You don't see cracks.
Say no to crack. The pillars of the Putin regime, Brian, are lies, deception, false flags, head fakes, and fake news. So I don't know why everyone is so quick to believe any narrative from Prigozhin or Putin in light of what's happening right there. My default setting of interpreting narratives out of the Kremlin is incredulity.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The more American media are calling it a coup or rebellion, the more likely it is what the Russians call a maskirovka, a big strategic head fake. It's a redeployment of the most effective part of his army back to the same starting point of February 24th, because Putin is more obsessed with living to see a victory parade in Kiev. He doesn't care about the western part of Ukraine. That can break off. Everything west of Kiev can break off and be NATO, Schmado, Wado, whatever. But Kiev and the eastern part of Ukraine will come back to Russia, or he didn't write that essay saying so 2 years ago. Folks, if you pay attention, he's telegraphed every single punch. And in his essay, it wasn't about NATO is expanding. That was the most surprising thing about Saturday was Yevgeny Prigozhin, or rather Friday, was that he said, hey, Shoigu and Gerasimov lied to Putin to get us in this war. There's no Nazis here. They weren't going to join NATO. NATO isn't surrounding us. They're not trying to surround us. We shoot at these guys. They shoot back and they fight honorably. They're not Nazis. Shoigu lied to Putin. That's way, way bigger than Putin. I'm coming for you, and I'm bringing my tanks, and I'm bringing hell with me, or whatever. That's not what happened at all. But as long as you can get the Western media to believe that really was a guy rebelling against Putin, and instead of a guy who was ordered about a month ago that he's going to redeploy to Belarus, then go ahead.
We see cracks?
No, we don't see cracks. Back in a second with more cracks when we come back. More stuff right after this. Also, the world's ugliest dog gets a bad rap. AM 770 KTTH.